Hello, everybody. My name is Brian Rose. I serve as the Associate Director for Career Education in the VCU School of Business Career Services office. Today, as you can see, we're talking about interviewing 101. We'll really go over, preparation. We'll go over different types of interview questions to prepare for, and how to handle different types of interviews. So hopefully this is a pretty good holistic view of how to attack interviewing, and we're excited to be talking about that today. So one thing I think is important to launch off with is the idea that intentional practice makes perfect. I'll never forget many, many years ago in middle school, I had a Richmond Kickers soccer player. If some of you know Richmond Kickers or are from Richmond, you'll know that there's a lower level soccer team called the Richmond Kickers that resides in Richmond. And a soccer player came to my middle school and talked about intentional practice making perfect. And for whatever reason, that lesson stuck with me. And what he was saying is that just kicking the ball around a field does not make perfect skills happen, right? You have to be intentional about it. You have to practice specific skills. You have to give it your full focus. So one thing I think is important to realize is that intentional preparation for interviews makes perfect. It's not just practicing 3 or 4 questions that are the most common behavioral interview questions. Googling that and then, writing in a Word document, not writing in a Word document, Googling those, 4 to 5 or so questions and then just speaking them into a mirror and hoping you're going to remember those words, right? It's actually practicing and writing those examples down and stories down and having them in the back of your head. So the way that we do that is develop an about me sheet. So copy and paste the job description you have applied for and that you're going to be interviewing for into a Word document and write out stories and examples for each one of the requirements. So what they're looking for, they specifically write about in the job description. You have the answers for the test right in front of you, right? You have typically all the types of experiences that they're going to ask about. If they want to learn about, blank, they've already written it in the job description as something that's important to them. So make sure that you're copy and pasting that job description and writing out examples and stories that relate to what they're looking for. It's really that simple. And oftentimes when I say that, people have never even considered doing that and never even heard to do that, right? And then from there, we're also going to write out answers for the most common interview questions. We have to do that too, because we're typically going to be asked some shape or form of the following questions. Tell me about yourself. Why are you interested in this role or company? Tell me about a conflict with a coworker, peer, or client. You're going to be asked about, how you handle conflict somehow. Describe a project that went well. Describe a project that didn't go well. You want to have some examples for both. What are your main strengths and areas of improvement? What are your strengths and weaknesses, right? Why should we hire you? What traits should we look for? What makes you different? And then they're going to likely ask you, do you have any questions for us, right? So we want to be prepared for common interview questions as well. But we also want to be prepared with plenty of stories and examples on top of that, specifically related to the job description, by writing out examples and stories for the qualifications they have listed. And what that's going to do is that's going to make intentional practice happen. You're going to remember these stories. You're going to have access to them. So if you're asked any question, right, any question at all, and any question that relates to the job itself, you're going to be prepared to answer it. Continuing with preparation, you'll see under Analyze Job Posting, understand how your strengths and weaknesses are tied to the job, and describe how this position impacts your career and why you're excited about it. It's important that you have the ability to, after you've prepared a lot of stories and examples, that you're also able to communicate what about this job is actually interesting. Why are you excited about it, right? What is specifically interesting to you day to day about it? Research the company. It's important to realize that there are 2 things that we're primarily looking for when interviewing candidates. 1, we're making sure that you have the skills and abilities and experience to do the job, right? 2, we're making sure that you're a culture fit, right? Does your outlook on work, does your outlook in this industry, does your work ethic match the culture of this organization. So one of the best ways to communicate that you are a culture fit, that you are the right person, is to identify key values that speak to you about the company. Right? Look for the mission statement, the vision statement, understand that and how your values fit. Conduct informational interviews with any contacts you have. Right? If you know anyone who's worked there, you should be reaching out to people that you know, right, to get some insight of what it's like to work there. Then from there, research any recent achievements, acquisitions, interesting articles, right? Think specifically about what you might be able to communicate about what you find interesting about that company, and communicate, this specific thing I read, provides a lot of confidence and interest in where this company is heading. I think it's really fascinating. So make sure that you're intentionally thinking through, why do I want to work there? You're not just saying, oh, blank company cares about sustainability and I care about sustainability. That's not good enough. What about the job? What about the company? What about how they communicate their values and their focus, the way they treat their customers, the way they do work in their job description, on their website? What about the way they communicate themselves as a company connects to you? And make those connections yourself, right? That matters to me because. Don't just say it matters to you. Actually say why, right? Make those connections, show you're a culture fit, and show them that you understand the job and understand what they're about as a company. The next thing that we're looking for and what we're talking about is professional dress. So one thing to note on this is that we could literally spend an hour talking about this. We're probably going to spend 2 or 3 talking about it right now. When it comes to the colors of what we're wearing, it's our navy blues, our dark and light grays, and our blacks is what we're looking for in regards to colors of our apparel and our professional dress. Literally just Google business professional attire, and it'll tell you all the rules of business professional attire. So if you forget anything I'm talking about, we're looking for business professional, bottom line. The one major that likely doesn't have to wear business professional, you can wear business casual. Again, Google what that is information systems. They don't necessarily have in that industry the same dress code that maybe some other folks would have. Khakis and a polo or something like that might be good enough. But for 90% of you, we're looking for business professional dress. So what is business professional dress? Business professional dress is a suit jacket of some kind, slacks, and a button down and a tie. Business professional dress is also a suit jacket, a dress. Business professional dress is also a suit jacket and a blouse and a skirt, knee length or longer skirt. A business professional dress is also a suit jacket, a blouse, and slacks. So essentially, business professional dress involves a jacket, a blouse or button down, and slacks, or a jacket, a blouse, and a knee length or longer skirt. That's typically what it involves. When it comes to our blouse color, when it comes to our button down color, we're looking for white. We're looking for a lighter blue, classic lighter blue. We're looking for an off-white, right? Pretty straightforward. You can get a little creative with your tie. Nothing too much going on, but you can have some stripes on it if you like. When it comes to our necklaces, you can do a yellow necklace, a red necklace, something that helps you stand out. One thing that we really suggest is heels not too high, probably 2 inches or so max is what we're looking for. Also, when it comes to length of skirt or dress, make sure it's knee length, make sure it's a little lower. Be very, very conscious of the slit and where it is and how high it is. That's kind of the main drawback of any skirt or dress or anything like that. Again, if you have any questions about business professional dress, literally just Google it, reach out to us to discuss it further. Talk to professionals in your life, faculty members, business career coaches, and friends to make sure that the clothing matches the standards. The last thing I'll say about this is access to this clothing. I want to make very clear that I did not interview in anything but Goodwill suits until after I got on my master's program. I think I used that sentence as a double negative unintentionally. All I interviewed in before I got my master's in a full-time job was Goodwill suits. If you choose the right consignment shops, choose the right Goodwills, you can find business professional clothing for a very, very, very cheap price and quality too. The second thing to understand there is there's also a suit yourself closet. There are 3 career services offices on campus, us in business career services, then you have engineering career services, and then you have central career services in the student commons that serves the rest of campus. When there is access to central career services, you can utilize their suit yourself closet. And literally you can go to that closet, get clothing that fits you, and it is yours. It is not a rental. The clothing is yours. So if Goodwill is a bit of a challenge or anything else is a bit of a challenge, you can utilize that. So again, we could spend an hour on this. We just spent 4 minutes. So we're going to keep going. Don't hesitate to ask questions about dress in the future. So no matter what times we're in, it's important to realize that Skype and phone interviews are things, Skype and phone are interview platforms that are used very, very frequently. Typically, Skype and phone are used for the first round of interviewing to connect with a potential candidate. It's usually a shorter interview, probably about 30 minutes. Your in-person interview is typically about an hour or so. But as you know, kind of in today's climate, we are in a situation where Skype interviewing, the phone interview might be the first interview, and then the Skype might be treated as sort of the in-person interview, an hour or maybe even 2 hours, set up with a few different people, some panels, individuals, whoever. Anyways, long story short, it's important to be prepared to understand the different dynamics over Skype and phone and be prepared to handle yourself slightly differently. So with Skype, we still want to wear business professional attire. We still want to dress up. We still want to very much be ready to go in regards of how we look, how we're groomed, all that good stuff. We want to have an appropriate background. So you want to make sure whatever is behind you actually looks professional and is not distracting. We've actually, if you navigate to Handshake to our resources tab, we have virtual backgrounds that you can utilize. They're VCU branded that you can literally use in case you live in a situation or are in a situation there's no real, good looking background. You can utilize a virtual background that is VCU branded that we've provided on Handshake in our resources tab. So we encourage you to navigate there and utilize that if you need to. It's important to utilize eye contact as if it were face-to-face. Don't stare at yourself to make sure that you look good the entire time. Stare into the camera like you're making eye contact, right? Log on early to ensure that you have a good connection. So make sure that whether it's Skype or whether it's Zoom or whatever the platform is, we want to make sure that we're in a place that has a good connection, that we have everything set up, that our microphone works, and we have a plan for all of that. We encourage you to consider headphones for Skype or Zoom or any other video interview. So it's important to realize that sound quality is important, and so what headphones do is they oftentimes knock out a lot of the background noise, so any of the white noise in the background, headphones typically knock that out. Laptop microphones typically pick up just about everything, so we consider utilize headphones even though you might be having headphones coming out of your ears or whatever. The sound quality beats any sort of aesthetic issue there. One thing with Skype, it's important to realize that if it's just not working, Skype, Zoom, any video platform, if it's just not working, we need to make sure that let's not keep forcing it. If there's internet issues, I know power goes out, all this different stuff that you cannot control. You might have tested it and it might have went perfect the day before, but for some reason it's not working. If you've disconnected 2 or 3 times, it's okay to provide a solution and just say, hey, I am so sorry. I tested this an hour ago. I tested this yesterday, and it's just not working. Is there any way that we could just connect over the phone? Or here are the times I'm available, tomorrow or whatever. So it's okay to be proactive and say, I've tested this. I'm so sorry. Let's finish this over phone. Here's when I'm available the rest of the day. Here's when I'm available tomorrow. Be proactive if there are issues. Skype and phone, or sorry, I keep saying Skype. I would like to more say, video in general, and Zoom and Skype and all those. So video and phone, right? Find a quiet and private place to interview. So make sure that you're taking the time to find a quiet place to interview where there's not a dog barking and all that sorts of stuff. It's super, super irritating and distracting as a interviewer when there's a lot going on in the background. Tell your family members, tell your friends, tell your people who live in your apartment or anything like that you have an interview coming up, and that you need to make sure that they respect that. One thing that I have a bit of a problem that you probably can tell as you're listening to this recording is I talk a little fast sometimes, and I mumble a little bit more than I mean to when I'm speaking. So one thing you need to do as I start speaking slower now is make sure you speak just a little bit slower over Zoom, Skype, video, and over the phone. It helps people understand you a little bit more, and it helps people sort of comprehend what you're saying just a little bit easier. When you're in person, for some reason it's a little easier to navigate someone who's speaking faster. Over the phone and over video, it's just a little bit more difficult. The last thing here is be enthusiastic. Even though someone can see you on a video interview, we want to make sure that your voice inflection matches what you're talking about. You can't say, I'm very excited for this opportunity, and it just sounds like something that's going to be really wonderful, right? We want to say, I'm very excited about this opportunity, and the reason why I'm excited about it is blank. Make sure your tone and the way you're talking matches the words coming out of your mouth, right? So even though they can see you on video, doesn't mean that the nonverbals and the tone isn't important. And especially over the phone, we want to make sure that our tone sounds engaged when someone can't see our nonverbals and can't see our excitement. Last thing with just phone, control your breathing, right? Make sure that you are taking a moment to breathe and take breaths, right? Don't drive while interviewing. Too often people drive while interviewing over the phone, and that's just not appropriate, and it's not professional. Again, enthusiasm, even more so. And then listen thoroughly and then speak. When you're not on a video interview, you can't see when people stop talking or when people are done and thinking and then continuing. So it's important to listen thoroughly, give it a second or two, and then start talking. So you're not accidentally talking over each other or anything like that. So those are some suggestions in regards to engaging over remote interview platforms. So you have a few primary types of interview questions. So it's important to know what these are so that you understand how to handle them. The first is our standard question, something like, why are you interested? Something like, how does this company relate to your career goals? So what we want to talk about is why they're asking these questions. So for standard questions, they're just trying to get an understanding and an idea of where you're coming from, who you are, what you're all about. So why are you interested in this role? Okay, we'll discuss who you are and how your passions led you to this position. Because at the end of the day, we need to understand the intent of the question, not just the content. So when you're asking a question like, why are you interested? Why are they asking that? They're making sure that you understand the role, they're making sure that you understand the company, and they're making sure that those things are in line. The company needs and the company culture and who you are and what you understand about the role all is in line. It's not just purely talking and understanding about the content of the questions, understanding the intent, right? Companies want to hear why this particular culture, why them in that specific situation. If you're asked how does this position relate to your career goals, it's not just saying, tell me all your dreams and aspirations. It's also, what's the intent behind that? That we are in your at least intermediate to long-term plans. That this person can start here and grow here, right? Whether or not that happens or not, it's important that you understand that the intent of questions like that is for you to be able to say, hey, I'm very excited about this job. This is how I feel like I can grow in this job, and this is where I want to go with this company afterwards, right? Because the second you say, well, I want to get my MBA, or I want to go back to school, or I want to do something that's totally not related to this job, I'm essentially going to be gone in a year or two. right, is the second that you lose them, right? You're focusing too much on the content. What are your long-term career goals? It's focusing too much on the content. What is the intent, right? Let me get an understanding of who this person is to make sure that their missions and their goals align with our needs, right? Understand the intent of questions as you're asked them and as you prepare for them, not just the content, especially with standard questions. Behavioral questions. Tell me about a time when, describe a time when, right? This is something that they are using past behavior to be as a predictive element for future behavior. So it's important to realize that you understand why they're asking this. They're asking for examples and for stories to be able to say, they did this before, so like they're going to do blank before, right? So utilize the STAR method. Situation, task, action, result. If you think back to elementary school, you learned about the evolution of a story. You learned about setting, you learned about rising action, you learned about climax, you learned about falling action, and you learned about resolution. That's the same thing with the STAR method. So some of you who talk a lot, aka me, the STAR method will help you stay on track, right? It will help you not ramble. For some of you who are trying to figure out what to say, what not to say, and also maybe your answers are a bit shorter than they should be, the STAR method will help you share more and provide structure for you to handle the questions well. So for example, what does the STAR method stand for? It stands for situation, task, action, result, like we talked about. Or what does each one mean? Sorry, I stuttered there a little bit. Situation essentially is saying, this is where I was working, this is what the team I was on that was doing, here's who was involved in a specific situation. It's setting the stage for what you're about to talk about. Even if someone's read your resume, it doesn't mean they know everything about you, right? They have no idea exactly where it's coming from and all the stories that you have in your mind. So it's important not to just jump in the middle of a story because they'll have no understanding of why you did what you did, why you didn't do another thing. So provide the situation. Let them know where you were working, when the situation was, what team it was, all that good stuff so they understand what's going on. Task is simply a transition portion. It's just saying, and what I needed to do was blank, or what my focus was blank. It's giving them an idea about your mindset. Action, this is the meat of the story, right? This is what you actually did to solve the problem. And this is what you actually did to complete the project. And that's important to tell the result. So often people just say the action and they don't know how to conclude it, and they don't conclude it. Tell me how it went well. Tell me how it didn't go well if you're asked a question about something not going well. Tell me how something concluded and how everything resolved. One thing to add to this as well is if you have the opportunity to share what you learned from a situation, that's really fantastic too. So if you're able to say, and this is how everything concluded, and this is what I learned, that's a really great thing to be able to say, hey, because I learned this, I now can bring this to your company. It's a great way for companies to be able to say, oh, wow, they learned that, so they're going to be able to bring that to my company. The last thing, type of interview question you'll typically see is a situational question. So they put you specifically in a situation and ask you to handle it. Something like you're involved with a conflict, you're involved in a conflict with a team member regarding strategies for blank. So what do you do in this situation? First, you take a second, think, say, hey, thanks for your question. Do you mind if I think for a second? And you start thinking. And then after a couple seconds, you start sharing the information. You walk interviewers through your thought process, and then you make sure that you share procedural experience. So what I mean by that is you would start saying something like, well, when I'm in conflict, this is how I typically like to handle the situation. You would give a context as to, I have done this in the past, right, and here's how I've handled it. And with this specific situation, this is what I would do. You would also fully, if there's a lot of context to the question, the situation they offer, you would walk them through your thought process, and then you could say something like, and that reminds me of a time when blank. So it's important to say, here's my thought process, here's what I would do, and here's a really quick STAR example of how I've done something like that in the past. So it's a really good idea to drive home, hey, this is what I think I would do, and also here's what I've accomplished and done similar to that went well too. So we talked a little bit earlier about some common interview questions. So we're going to go over some tips pretty quickly. These slides are pretty extensive in content, and that's intentionally so that you can, come back and reference these or pause and write things down or anything like that. So it's intentional that there's all this content on it. So tell me about yourself. This is a question that oftentimes people say they don't really enjoy. And I think the reason why they don't enjoy it is because they don't know what to say. Essentially, it's kind of your elevator pitch, in shortened format, So what's important is to do is break it down into 3 parts. For tell me about yourself, break it down into 3 parts. Remind them of who you are, your name, major, where you're from, that you go to VCU. Again, it's important to realize that these people might not know who you are. Just like telling them the setting in regards, or the situation and the setting in regards to the STAR method, this is pretty similarly. They don't really have an idea of exactly who you are. Or maybe they've reviewed so many applicants and they've had a busy day, so they've forgotten to read your resume right before the interview. So again, remind them of who you are, what your major is, all that good stuff. The second part is why this field, why this major, and then experience that relates. So if you're applying and you're interviewing for a supply chain related role, give them some context as this is who I am, and I'm really excited that I've pursued supply chain because, and these are the reasons why I've chosen it. I've always been someone that's very procedural, I like the fast-paced nature, that type of stuff, right? Explain your passion and interest in the field so they understand, again, that you're a culture fit, that you like this field, that is of interest, right? And then talk about any experience that relates, right? Give them a chance to get to know you, right, with understanding why this field, why this major, and then tell them about any experience that relates to what you are getting into. You're not going to, spend a ton of time on that, just maybe a quick 20, 30 seconds about your experience because they have your resume and all that good stuff. Just give them a quick little abridged version. Then from there, you'll conclude it with why this company. Bring it back to them, right, and bring it back to this interview. So you're asked a question that's, inherently quote-unquote selfish, right, inherently a question about, you. Take it back to them. Say, this is why I'm sitting in front of you all. This is why I'm interested specifically in this company, right? Turn it back to them. It's always a very impressive thing. Sometimes they combine, tell me about yourself and why this role or company, and so that kind of, preparing in this 3-part way, prepares you to be able to answer why this role at the end. But even if it's just tell me about yourself, a really brief, abridged version about why this company or role, it brings something that is inherently about you, makes it about them, and it's a really positive thing for them. And typically, if it's just the first question is tell me about yourself, the second question is going to be, as you see here, why this role company. So they'll look at themselves and be like, oh, you read our minds. Thanks for talking about us. And tell us more. You said a little bit already, but tell us more about why this role. Again, implement your research and apply it to your interests. This is what I read, this is what I saw, and this is why what I read and saw actually applies to me and my interests. Don't just bring up concepts that don't matter to you. Apply those concepts, apply what you read in research to you and the interests that you have, right? Even if you're applying to a work study job, right? It doesn't even have to be directly related to your career. Talk about the skills that you're excited about. Talk about, what you've heard about that office and what that office does. You're not going to make a career necessarily about being a work study student in the Business Career Services office, but be able to talk about, why the idea of being a part of the energy of helping students get jobs and just being kind of a cog in the machine and a support system for these students and as a work study role is important to you, right? Discuss some items in your research that maybe impressed you and what do you uniquely bring to the role, right? And then you're going to be asked about conflict, likely. Another different interview tip here. Be careful, speak positively. Discuss experiences that ended well. You're not venting here, right? We don't want to come across like we still have baggage. That's a really, really important piece to this. When you write down examples of conflicts you've had with peers, coworkers, and clients, it's important to make sure that you're not gabbing it up or you're not venting or you're not so frustrated. Make sure it's very straightforward. This is what happened. This is how I settled it. This is how I handled it, and things ended well. Right? Be straightforward regarding to the issues that led to the conflict. And if you included, you had some poor communication moments, and this is how you learned and grew, and this is how you owned them with that person, and this is how you set a plan of attack to get on the same page going forward. It's okay to own your contributions a little bit. As long as you talk about how you improved and how you got on the same page with the other person, it's okay to own it. And then discuss what you learned and how you grew from the experience, right? It's really important to be honest, but also be careful. Speak positively. This is not venting, and discuss experiences that ended well. A couple of times I've heard from students that I don't know how to answer the question about failure. So how do I do that? So describe a situation that involved individuals that maybe you worked with on a group or something like that. So it's important to realize that you want to describe the situation and the individuals involved so that people understand, how everything failed. And it wasn't just on one person. It wasn't just on you or somebody else. It's important to make sure that you handle the situation part of that star piece so that they actually have context as to how things went wrong, right? Discuss the main items that led to the failure. You don't need to get all into the nitty-gritty and every little thing, but what are the main items that caused the problem? Just like conflict, what did you learn and how have you grown? Strengths and improvements. We need to be very prepared to discuss specific strengths that relate to the role for different companies and what they're looking for. We also want to choose an improvement that comes from a strength. So for me personally, I can be a bit altruistic, right? I can be, and that altruism and that desire to contribute and to do a bit more than I should at times and agree to more than I should, maybe puts too many projects and too many things and too many loose ends on my plate. And sometimes I need to refocus and think a bit longer term than just short term. So it's important to realize that the way that you communicate something, make sure it comes from a strength, right? That an improvement or a weakness, it comes from something that actually makes you good, but that good part of you makes it a problem, right? You want to be honest about what your weakness or area of improvement is, but make sure it inherently is a strength or inherently comes from a good place. And then describe how you're working to improve on that issue. And then another one that we talked about is why you. This is your candidate thesis statement. This is your thesis statement as a candidate. What sets you apart? Think back to group projects, work experience. What do you bring that is unique to other people, right? So one thing for me that I'm always going to say is that I'm always going to do whatever it takes to get the job done. I'm going to use examples of what that means. I'm going to say, hey, I created myself based off of other assessments that cost a lot of money. I made a free assessment that is reliable for students to be able to take in order to decide upon their major within the School of Business, right? And I did that without anybody asking me to do it. So that is an example of what sets me apart is I will do anything that I possibly can to serve students because I want to lift up and support students and help them get to where they need to be. And I have proved that through blank. So again, what sets you apart? Think about achievements. Think about working with other people, things that you've done, right? What sets you apart? What makes you different? And if you can, tie in the job description. So as we get to the last few slides here, again, this is another wordy slide, so write it down, take a picture. If you have this slide deck, it's really helpful as well. But good questions to ask employers, right? When we think about asking employers questions, we don't just want to say, what's the culture here? Or, what issues have y'all had? Or, what's the day-to-day look like? Or what are the hours, right? We want to make people think. We want to learn about that culture by asking unique questions. So instead of saying, what's the culture? You can say, what have been your team's greatest successes and greatest struggles this year? You get to learn about how honest they are. You get to learn about what's going well and what are they struggling with. You say, instead of asking about the day-to-day, You get to say, if I were to solve one problem in the first 90 days in this role, what would you want it to be? Instead of just asking about the day-to-day, I can say, what can you tell me about the day-to-day operations of this role that I can't learn from a job description or company website? You're technically asking about the day-to-day, but you're also saying, adding that next extra layer and saying, what really goes on here? What's going on? Get to know the people in the interview. What about working at blank have you enjoyed the most? Then question 5 here is what I call a get out of jail free card. So the question is there anything about my experience or lack thereof that I can clarify for you? Or is there anything from this interview that I can clarify for you? You're not going to ask both of those. It's an either or. So essentially, if you feel like you're walking to an interview that you have some transferable skills, but you don't have everything they're looking for, asking the question, is there anything about my experience or lack thereof that I can clarify for you, is a really great question to have in your back pocket, because you don't want them walking out of that interview saying, oh, they didn't share this or that, or, we gave them a shot. We thought they'd have some transferable experience, but, we didn't get to some of that. Our biggest red flags weren't answered, right? If you know that that's a problem headed in, ask that question, because likely they'll say, yeah, can you explain this? Or, no, we're fine, but do you have anything? And you get to say, hey, here's specifically what I have that relates to the role that maybe we didn't get to, right? And you get to share that information. And then you always want to conclude is, what is the interview or hiring process timeline for this interview, right, for this job? So what is the interview or hiring timeline or process? What are the next steps? I didn't mention in that last slide, but we don't ask about salary yet. We don't ask about all that. That's typically handled when we get an offer, or maybe we have an interview with the HR professional and they go over benefits and they go over salary ranges and all that good stuff when we meet with a human resources person, but we do not ask about salary in interviews. General pre-interview logistics. If it's in person, bring 5+ copies of your resume. You'll get an itinerary. You'll know who you're meeting with, how many people you're going to be talking to likely. So bring about 2 or 3 extra than who's listed on your itinerary. You never know who's going to be there. Understand where to park and how to get to where you need to go. If it's a familiar area, you'll know what the traffic patterns look like, right? You know what all that looks like. If it's unfamiliar, make sure you walk it. I've had students who fly to Chicago and I say, hey, you fly to Chicago, they put you in a hotel, they're really excited about you. Do not waste their time. Do not be late. The day before, walk from your hotel and walk to that office in street clothes. You don't need to dress up or anything, but walk to that office and know exactly where it is and how long it takes for you to get there, right? Do not be late. One thing about arriving is arrive about 15 minutes early. And what I mean by arriving 15 minutes early is make sure you're at their administrative assistant desk or actually in the physical office, not that just you're at their office building or anything like that. If you're in your car for 30, 45 minutes, that's fine. Sitting in the parking lot waiting and preparing. It is what it is. But do not arrive any sooner than 15 minutes. It's a little awkward. So one thing that's important to realize is, day of interview, introduce yourself, provide a firm handshake with everybody you meet. When you check in, whether it's the security desk or the administrative assistant, the second that your feet hit the ground outside of your car, the interview has started, right? Almost every single person you meet, especially if the company has a really good culture, is going to be asked about how you handled conversations with them. So that front desk attendant, that administrative assistant, they're going to ask, how did they treat you? Did they ask your name? Did they treat you like a real person, right? Be kind, be confident, right? One thing to note is if you're in person, wait for the interviewers to sit before you do. Take the other people's lead, right? One thing in the middle here, clear your mind and listen carefully to the questions. Remember, intentional practice makes perfect. You've done all the work that you can possibly do, right? I always think about it. I really like musicals. I like Broadway. I hear people talk about their experiences with it, and they talk about possibly being nervous, but mainly they're just excited. They have adrenaline because they know they've done the work. They know they've put in the time, and if something slightly goes wrong, they'll rebound, they'll ad-lib, right? They'll be adaptable because they've done the preparation to be adaptable. So it's important, clear your mind, be present, take your time, right? And make sure that you understand ahead of that I've done all the work I can to be prepared, right? As I mentioned a little earlier in the interview, if for any reason you get stumped at any point, it's okay to say, hey, thanks for your question. Do you mind if I think for a second? Now with, 10 to 12 questions or so, it's important that we, don't say that after every single question. But if you're stumped after a few, it's okay to say, hey, thanks for your question. Do you mind if I think for a second? And that buys you about 15 seconds. Again, prepare questions that interviewers are it's going to make them think. It's going to show that you're really thinking about working there and being there. Last couple of things here. After the interview, evaluate it. Is this position right for me? Right? We're not always going to be having the bargaining chip. Sometimes we're just really going to want to get a job to get some experience, right? So whether it's right for us or not, we're not super concerned about it. But if we do have some bargaining and some different opportunities, really think about, does this culture fit what I want, right? It's okay to decline the position if it seems really, really, really not what you're looking for. That's totally okay. Send thank you notes. Make sure that you send thank you notes for every single person. Actual handwritten notes, it's quite rare, but make sure that you at least get the business card and email address from everybody that you meet with, and write tailored thank you notes to everybody. You can pretty much write the same thank you note, just change one sentence or two. You don't want your thank you notes to be any more than about 3 or 4 sentences. You just say, hello, my name is Brian Rose. Thank you so much for the interview the other day. I really enjoyed our conversation about blank. I hope to see you in the future, or something like that. Very simple, 2 to 3 sentences, 3 to 4 sentences, slightly customized, really straightforward, nothing too long. The last thing here is write down what you were asked. Don't forget what you were asked so that you can prepare for questions in the future, right? There's no reason to be interviewed and then not take a second to write down or not write down the questions that you were asked. It's important for you to write those down so you can prepare in the future. So my goal was 45 minutes for this presentation. We're at 42 and a half. So I feel like we're in a pretty good place here. So thanks for hanging in. I know that was a ton of content. It's intentionally a ton of content because all of you are in different places. Freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, alumni, 20 years in your career, whatever it is, you're all in different places in regards to your comfortability with interviews, what you know about preparing, what you don't know about preparing. And so hopefully today was a ton of context for you to understand and prepare a little differently and strategize a little differently to handle your interviewing. Please do not hesitate to set up a practice interview with a business career coach. They are set for an hour. For about 20 to 30 minutes, we handle standard behavioral and situational questions, and then for about 30 minutes, we debrief. Please do schedule those on Handshake. When you schedule them on Handshake, you're sent a pre-survey for you to complete and let us know what the job is. Even if you don't have a job or internship or an opportunity you're applying for, you can just tell us in general what you'd like to practice for. It doesn't specifically have to be for an actual opportunity. You can just tell us, hey, I'm just trying to practice to get general practice, and that's totally fine. Bottom line, if you remember nothing else from this presentation, just remember we care a whole lot about you, just want to help you be successful, and we hope to talk to you in the future.